Kia ora, good evening. Southland's Waitona Lagoon is to be part of a $20 million project to improve natural waterways. The Department of Conservation and Fonterra today announced a partnership which will see work on some key waterways around the country over the next decade. The project will initially focus on 5 key catchments in significant dairying regions. The lagoon was recognised as being in danger of flipping to a point of no return due to increased sediment and nutrients in the waterways around 2 years ago. Doc Marihaku Area Manager Andy Roberts says it's not known how much money will be spent at Waitona, but says it will help the area.
We've got 8 or 9 different candidate projects that we're going to work through. We think that it's mostly in some of the catchment areas, some of those streams that flow into the lagoon, a little bit around the lagoon edge, maybe some with the lagoon opening. So we haven't finalised that because there are so many possibilities for us. We want to make sure we get the best one.
Now, Waitona Lagoon was at the point of flipping and the water quality there is believed not to be that great. In terms of that, what impact is this going to have?
Well, this work I think is really going to help us test out some techniques that might improve the water quality medium to longer term. And so ideas like looking at how the drainage patterns work, whether riparian plantings actually improve water quality, what sort of buffering effect around the edge, and how we might manage the opening of the lagoon. So all of those things are really useful to test out, particularly as the lagoon hasn't flipped and it's still, the water quality is still, you know, it's okay. It's not flash, but it hasn't flipped, so it's important.
Now, in terms of the work that you're doing, it had been suggested that at some of these places the work would include plantings and managing pests and weeds. Is that something that we'll see here as well?
I think it's more likely that we'll be looking at plantings, river, creek edge management, some of the buffer areas around the lagoon. As I was saying before, we're already funded for pest and weed control around the lagoon area. So that's, I mean, we might do a little bit, but that's less likely. We really want to look at new bits of work, new stuff we haven't tried before, and initiatives that Fonterra and iwi are keen to support. So we're really looking at the ideas that also Fonterra brings to the table to test out new stuff.
Sheep and beef farm profits are predicted to halve this season, according to Beef and Lamb New Zealand's Economic Service. The industry organisation says this comes back to lower lamb prices and the impact of drought. In its mid-season update, before-tax farm profit for the 2012-13 season is expected to fall 54% on last season to an average of $73,000 across New Zealand. Economic Service Executive Rob Davison says lamb numbers are up, but this did not offset lower prices and impact of drought. He says cattle returns are predicted to drop 8.8%, but outlook is relatively positive. The Bluff oyster season has been open for around a week, with the sought-after delicacy as popular as ever. Barnes's oyster manager Graham Wright says he's had strong demand locally as well as from around the rest of the country. The first week of the season has once again proved troublesome weather-wise, with the boats only getting out on 4 of the first 7 days. He says oysters seem to be in good quality this year, although it's at least a month before any decision on raising the quota is made. The oyster season is open until the end of August or until the quota is filled. Safety improvements at Invercargill's Splash Palace are causing frustration for some pool users, with some patrons ignoring the changes. A number of safety improvements were made at the facility's car park over summer, including moving disabled parks closer to the entrance. However, some patrons have continued parking in that area, meaning for those for whom the parks were created are left without. Among those affected, regular pool user Alan Knowles, who says it's extremely frustrating that some people take the parking and it makes it a lot more difficult for himself. Aquatic Services Manager Pete Thompson says staff are working on the issue.
We're finding that people are parking in the disabled parks and taking up that space that is otherwise there for disabled users. Now, it might be because this is a change and people take a bit of time to get used to change, but we have signage up and hopefully when the line markings go down, that'll make it easier for people to realise where they should be parking.
And this is just one of a number of problems that you're seeing with people misusing the car park, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've made a number of modifications to the car park. So what we're suggesting people do is take your time when you come into the car park, reorientate yourself and make sure you're parking in the appropriate place.
And in terms of action that you've taken so far from the pool's perspective, what have you had to do so far?
Yeah, look, we've done a range of things. We've actually had staff out here just reminding people that they are parking in disabled spaces. We've put posters on people's windscreens, and that has not had quite the effect we had hoped, and we've actually gone as far as producing a video, more out of humour than anything, just to remind people that these are in fact disabled parks.
I guess you're going to have to take a harder line at some point?
We're hoping that with a bit of education and with some time, people will begin to realise that these are in fact disabled parks, and they should be used just for those people specifically.
After the break, how a volunteer shortage is taking a toll in a small Southland town. Welcome back. The seaside town of Riverton could see some economic consequences if support for a coordinated approach to promote the town, its events and assets isn't found. Margot Southland explains.
A volunteer shortage is causing concern in Riverton, with fears it could take a toll on the town's tourism industry. Riverton's promotional trust, which was set up by the businesses of Riverton, is set to be disbanded because no new people are coming forth to operate it. Former chairperson of Riverton Area Promotions and local businesswoman Kasna Gilder says it's frustrating.
I think the Riverton will just cruise along, but I think that's sad because there's so much more potential here than just cruising along. I think that we've been all a bit lax in letting that happen. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of young people moving here, there's a lot more businesses in Riverton. It's actually become a little bit of a hot spot.
Ms Gilder says there's a lack of unison and commitment from residents, which isn't helping the town's promotion or volunteer situation.
Riverton's a little bit fragmented at the moment. There's a lot of new umbrella groups starting, which is wonderful, but I would like to see a group come together and help promotions, bring them all together. That was always the aim.
She says a coordinated approach to promote the town is needed.
Rather than everyone focusing on different projects, I think it would be more appropriate to see us focus on one. Like say, take whether it be the main street or the sound shell, and all focus as a community on that, and then get that done and move on to something else.
The Riverton Soundshell Trust is also short on volunteers, putting the future of the iconic amphitheatre at risk. Aparima Riverton Community Board Chair Blair Stewart says if the Trust decides not to renew the 10-year lease due to lack of community support, its future could be in jeopardy.
Personally, I think it'll be a shame to see it go because it's been there for a long time. It's an icon, it's part of Riverton, and but the sad part about it would that it could eventually be demolished, yes.
Volunteers for evening community patrols to reduce petty crime and emergency services volunteers are also needed. Back in January, we spoke to Fire Chief George Seater of the Riverton Fire Service, which at the time faced a serious volunteer shortage, which continues to affect the emergency service today.
The problems we're facing at the moment with staffing levels in Riverton is that particularly during the day, being short of crew, we've had incidences where, particularly we had a medical a while ago, where we only had one firefighter turn up, and she didn't have a driver's licence to take the truck out. So it had potential to be very serious.
Blair Stewart says the volunteer shortage is having a big impact and has a clear message for the residents of Riverton.
Just get in, give it a go, try it out, put something back into your town.
A public meeting to get volunteers involved in community projects and promotions is being held in the town on Monday, where it's hoped fresh volunteers can be recruited. Margot Southland, South Today News.
A public meeting on the economy and wages in Invercargill last night drew around 20 people. That meeting, False Economy, the high cost of a low wage economy, was organised by the Green Party. MPs Jan Logie and Denise Roche are coming to the end of a national tour of 16 locations, where they've been discussing the government's policy reforms and effects of funding cuts on community organisations and communities. Speakers from different organisations were also presenting at last night's meeting, including representatives for beneficiaries, people with disabilities and unions. Ms Logie says there are two main purposes of the meetings.
One is that my colleague Denise and I had a real feeling that the government's current economic direction, which is about lowering wages, was hurting communities. And so we wanted to be able to create an opportunity for people to hear the different stories about how the economy and the economic direction is impacting on people and families. And the second point of the tour really is for us to listen and to learn as MPs, because we want our voice in Parliament to be representing people living in our communities today and to be as effective as we can.
Now, you're most of the way through a national tour. What are some of the key messages that you're hearing around the country?
There's quite a few really, and one is that people from a whole range of places in our society are really, really struggling, that there are people working multiple jobs just to be able to survive.
In terms of next steps, what are you going to do after these meetings are finished?
Well, we're bringing the people back together who've been involved in over 100 organisations around the country, and so many stories, and asking them to help us develop a campaign to go out to the rest of New Zealand to be able to share those stories so that people can really consider the kind of economy that they want.
In around 50 days, Southlanders will need to have switched to a digital provider, with analogue television being switched off. Q Television has already switched over in Southland and is broadcasting locally on Freeview HD, as well as continuing to air on Sky and Freeview Satellite. According to recent research by the public information campaign Going Digital, an estimated close to 3,000 Southland homes have televisions that won't work once analogue television is switched off. After April 28th, viewers in Southland will need to have Freeview, Sky or Igloo. National Manager Greg Harford says people should take action to switch now. Numbers at an education centre for gifted children in Invercargill have increased threefold since it began. Enriched ILT Centre Manager Darren Ray says numbers have grown every year. 165 children aged 7 to 11 will spend a day a week learning at the centre this year. That compares with around 53 in its first year. The centre, funded by the ILT and ILT Foundation, opened in mid-2009, offering a program for gifted children 3 days a week. That's now increased to 5 days. Mr. Ray says teachers have become very good at identifying gifted children. And that's it from news. Stay with us for sport. Part 1 of our profile on New Southern Steel goal shoot, Janelle Fowler. Good night.